I used a stereo imaging plugin from Waves. It's called S1, I think. S1 Image.
S1 Imager.
Yeah. But I kind of stopped using it and just like started panning stuff.
Yo, what's up guys? Welcome to another Shamshir Sound video. My name is Ali Nadem. Today we're looking at one of your guys' requests asking about which elements should be stereo in the mix and which elements should be mono in the mix. So I just want to talk briefly about stereo, mono. We're not going to get too much into the technical scientific stuff, but for anybody who just wants kind of a brief overview, think of things in the mono as very in the center. It's going to hit you right in your face. A lot of drums are generally put in mono, and when you spread it across the stereo field, it's going to be more towards, you know, the outer field. It's going to be more panned. It's going to be wider. It's going to have a lot more dimension, but there's also consequences with that as well. So it's not like you want everything to be wide. You don't want everything to be mono. Maddox and Maurice West, I'm going to put a couple video clips. They talk about how Maurice West talks about how he made things so wide and he lost all the information when he listened on a mono system. And then Maddox also talked about how sometimes he gets demos and they're either way too wide or they're way too mono.
I used a stereo imaging plugin from Waves. It's called S1, I think. S1 Image.
S1 Imager.
Yeah. But I kind of stopped using it and just like started panning stuff.
Gotcha.
Left and right when I layered synths or whatever. I was kind of overdoing it as well because when I listen to my tracks in mono, like the older ones, they don't really like they sound so different.
Yeah.
Like that's really a problem I used to have. Like when I turned the mono button on and listened to my tracks.
Yeah.
Because I wanted to hear like what it would sound like in a club. Like you would just hear like the high frequencies, just the hissing part of the synth, you know, and not like the body part. So that's the problem I had really. And so I stopped using the S1. I don't know, sort of randomly panned stuff to the left and right and kept some in the middle so it would hit harder.
So we have to see what we can do. There's obviously rules that you can break and bend, but there are general principles that I abide by anytime I'm doing stuff. So for this example, I have here Voxengo MSED. This is a really cool plugin to show you a little bit of information. Now, it's not as detailed as some of the other plugins, but I like the size of this. It's not going to take up too much space. And it allows you to also mute the side or mute the mid, which is kind of cool. This might actually be beneficial for you guys who use isolated vocals or like a DIY a cappella, something like that. It's kind of beneficial, cool tool. So first, let's talk about kicks. You know, this is the staple. This is the most important thing in dance music. And take a look here. Now, if it's going to be very wide, you're going to see this kind of jumping around all over the place. When it's mono, you're going to see it more as like a vertical line. So we can see there that these kicks, very mono. A lot of that information is in the middle of it, and it's with good reason. So if we took that kick, and let's say, for instance, I took this kick and I made it really wide. So we're going to use the pre-computed effects, and I'm going to spread it out. You see, now it's really wide, and we can see a result of that. We can hear it. It's kind of panned to the right. It's very wide now. But there's a problem with that. And what's the problem? Is that when it's wide like that, it loses power. It just sounds weird. It's off-putting. Sometimes when you make something wide, it's not only unnatural, which is kind of weird when we say unnatural because, you know, it's a Davy Jones big room kick. But drums lose impact and they make a sacrifice when they're spread out wide. So in my opinion, there could be elements of your kick, maybe certain elements that are wide, maybe that top, maybe there's like a little layer in there. Maybe there's a bit of stuff being spatial, but the integral core of your kick should be in mono. And you can see that that gets that power, that gets that impact right in the middle. It's that smack in the face. So you can either leave your kick the way it is. Now let's see what would happen if I make this kick completely merged. So I'm gonna route this to number 1, and I'm gonna merge it all the way to see, does it make that big of a difference visually? because I have this Voxengo plugin on the master. Not really. So sometimes you'll have kicks that have a bit of stereo information. I think this is a good example, this Ishkerit kick, throw it in. Stereo delay is off. You can see like towards the end of the tail kind of has a little bit of movement, and that's completely fine. And that's why also like I don't really like doing an imager on my master, because like I usually like to set the way things sound on the stereo field in my mixer tracks, in the sounds themselves. And if I did make this completely mono, you see it sounds weird now. So not too long ago we were talking about how it's good that it's mono, but this sound was carefully crafted, carefully curated and massive with some layers, and because of that, we don't need to make it mono again. It already sounds juicy. It has a little bit of this cool spatial, tiny though. It's not going like this. How bad would this sound? That would just be weird. So we're gonna leave this kick because this is a cool example where the kick is mono, but the kick has a tiny little bit of kind of stereo field movement going on. And what we're gonna do now is we're just gonna paste a pattern, make it like 4 bars long. And we're just gonna introduce here a tom drum. And when we add the tron drum, what am I saying? When we add the tom drum, I'm gonna show you guys, because tom drums can be a bit tricky. You can have the tom drum be wide, super wide. You can have the tom drum be very mono. But the secret sauce, the secret sauce with the tom drum is going to be panning, because the panning can give you just a lot of movement with it. So I'm just going to go to something simple. I'm going to go to one of Ollie James' tom drum. And let's take a look at MSED here. Super wide, super wide, super wide, wide. Not as wide, but again, super wide. So these are very wide tom drums, so you could roll with a very wide tom drum. Let's see if we can find a relatively mono tom drum. We're going to go into the Kashmir pack. This is volume 3. Let's see here. Okay, so here's a very mono tom drum. Has a little sizzle. Same with this one, very mono. So, like I said, the tom drum is one of those things where like you could do wide, you could do mono. If it's very mono, consider panning it and EQing it very carefully so it doesn't stack on top of the kick and really take away a lot from the kick. Because when you work with mono and when you work with the very wide stuff, it's almost like you're working within a box, and like there's only so much space you can load up in this frequency, you know, at this level. There's only so much you can load up. Wide sounds at this level, they all take up space, so you got to be very careful with how you select stuff, how you make space for them. So let's take a mono tom. This one, sure, let's route it to number 2. And what I'm going to do is let's take a look at this plugin here, and we're just going to make a basic pattern. Okay. But what we're going to do is we're going to pan them. We're going to pan it slightly. And so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to show you. Very mono. There's a little bit of a kind of a little burst. But let's do it like maybe 19%. Even something small like 6% will do a big job in terms of not only spreading it out, because now you've taken a mono sound and you've spread it across the stereo field more, and we can see a result of this. Check this out. Not only does it help with making your sound wider, it's almost unnoticeably spread out because it's very subtle, 6%, I believe. And on top of that, it will also aid the kick. So now let's just play back. We're going to throw on maybe like a kickstart on here. And I'll EQ it with the parametric EQ. Hold on, guys. Cat is scratching on the door. So I'm just going to EQ this a bit. That's okay there. And one thing I'm going to say is that when you do spread things out really wide, like this isn't a good example. The tom is it's pretty subtle. But when you spread it really wide, be careful because the volume goes up. So things that are wider can be turned down much lower in volume because they're more audible. Does that make sense? Think of an effect that's super wide, just going all over the place. It can be turned down much lower in volume because it's more audible. As opposed to being so in the center. So be careful with volume is what I'm saying. So now we address the kick. The kick generally should be in the middle, the core integral part of it. We talked about how this kick had a little bit of spice, and that it had a tiny bit of width, and it wouldn't be in our favor to make this completely merged. It loses power because it already is basically merged in the middle. When we listen to this, the tom drum. Tom drum is cool, can be very wide, can be mono. This is kind of going to be more of something you want to experiment with. We're going to take a look at rides. Let's talk about cymbals. So before we talk about leads, I just want to talk about cymbals. So one thing I want you guys to do is next time you're making a song, go into the project, go into a sample pack and just listen, because many times I'll listen to a ride and I'll be like, whoa, that's super wide, or whoa, that's a very mono cymbal. And it doesn't mean that one is right or wrong, but also take into consideration, maybe a lot of producers don't talk about this. When a drummer is playing, right, he's got the kick drum right by his foot. He's got the tom drums. He's got the crash over here, right? He's got the crash over there. He doesn't have the crash right here. He has the crash over there. He has like that close hat over there. So you want to keep that in mind if you want to make things a bit more natural, in the sense that you're spreading things out, panning things, giving them their own location in the mix. Now with EDM, not a lot of people are going to ever really do that, but it's something to keep at the back of your mind that, drums do have a role in terms of where they sit in a field. And so you could do anything you want, but just keep that in mind. Now I'm just going to roll with whatever for this one. I'm just going to throw this in. Okay, actually, I don't really like those rides. Let's see. Let's check out these ones. Now, because the ride is very long, I always do cut self. And this, it's not super wide, but it does have some width to it. And you could use a much wider ride. That's really up to you. The cymbals, feel free. Do a wide cymbal, do a not so wide cymbal. Again, the important thing with this one is the volume. I'm going to do fill each 4 steps. And what we're going to do here, we're just going to turn on the ride. And really keep in mind, the wider it is, keep more attention to the volume, definitely. I don't like the length of this. I want to make it a bit shorter. I'm going to throw on an EQ for this one. I'm going to roll it off around 300 hertz. So cool. We talked about kick, we talked about tom and the cymbal there, the ride. Same thing goes with crashes. Don't be alarmed if you throw in a crash or an effect and it looks like it's going out of phase or out of correlation, a negative correlation, because since it's just one sample doing that, and since it's just a small time where it's doing that, and what I'm talking about is if you think that your track is going out of phase, because here you can see a positive correlation, meaning that our track should sound good in mono. But if it was way too wide, you'd see this going bonkers in the complete opposite direction. But it's okay if it does that, going like down to 0 and almost in the opposite direction briefly, if it's like during a break or like a long reverb trail, because those long reverb trails, long effect trail, long like echo, those are inherently like, you know, they're huge, right? They're very wide. So don't be too concerned about that. The concern for stereo width and keeping things in mono or stereo should always be the integral core parts, what is habitually always being dropped in your track, your leads, your kick, your percussion, you know, the stuff that's very important, the vocal. Though we want to make vocals huge, right? When we talk about huge vocals, a lot of banger tracks have vocals in the middle, and then they have a slight stereo width, maybe like a tiny harmony, a tiny chorus going on, but again, the vocals in the middle. And that's a common problem that I made. A common misconception is that we think that we need to throw on the vocals and then we just go like this. Oh, they're huge vocals now, but that actually makes the vocals terrible, and is not what you want to do. Which comes back to how we talk about how the mono elements, they're very powerful, but you have to choose things strategically when you want to put them in the wide part of your stereo field. So let's now add a synthesizer, because we've talked about percussion for quite a bit, and I just want to add like a basic synth. Let's just do something very simple. So let's see here what we'll make. Well, the key we're working in is in G. So let's see here. I might bring up a preset. Let's just make something real quick. Pay attention to MSED here, because this sound is very mono, but I've made a video on many different methods that you can make your sound wider and massive. So if you guys like using massive, check it out. And those same methodologies apply to generally many other synths, Salenth 1, whatever else you guys are using. First thing, I'm going to put a reverb, because that reverb does a good job at creating space, and we can see that have an effect. But what I'm going to do is let's do two saws, both with like a similar reverb. So we'll put the reverb at 60, and let's make this one maybe a lower. So we're going to make this one monophonic. I'm going to introduce a little bit of noise. I'm going to put a little filter on there. Alright, so now let's just make a quick MIDI. right, so some cheesy rave culture W&W ripoff. Love that track though. And let's see, so we have this in mono. We could do wider, you know, we could put on a dimension expander. And look what the dimension expander is doing for this synth. Right, completely mono in the middle. But when you start to crank that up with the size and the wetness. But because we talked about how we want to keep the power, what you can do is you can do two. We'll do one synth mono. The other one, still same thing, monophonic, but two voices. And we're going to spread that out, because when we spread that out, we get like the complete other effect. It's super wide. So that's sick. So it's really showing you guys there. You can do mono synth, maybe to crank up dimension expander. You could do mono synth with a wide synth. Layer that, make it just so juicy and thick. It's going to take up a lot of space, but it can work. And I'm going to add a layer here and designate these two guys as the children, just so we can just stick with one layer. And let's see here now, what does this sound like? We're going to route both of these guys to the same send and just listen to the synth. Let's just get lazy with this, throw on Camel Crusher, quick and easy. We'll crank up the compressor just to really pump it up. Just gonna make sure this kick is a bit louder than the lead. One thing you want to be careful of is these two saws, using them simultaneously. Sometimes you can get some phasing because we're literally playing like the same saw, the same key. So I would recommend either changing it up, do it maybe different pitch, manipulate it drastically, because we got to be careful here. Now with these choices we've made, let's listen to see what it sounds like in mono. See how the percussion is almost unfazed? And that's what you want, because if the kick was too wide, it would just sound weird on a mono system. And it's not like mono systems are just club only. This phone, like mono speaker, some of the best phones have a mono speaker. Many things are mono, many things are merging things. And so if it doesn't sound good in mono, like, if it doesn't sound decent in mono, it's generally not going to sound good on a lot of platforms, and that's something you want to keep in mind. So with this synth, the synth sounds a bit weirder because it sounds great in stereo, but then when we go this, it's kind of it kind of loses a little bit of its edge, loses a bit of that sparkle, but it's still audible. The percussion is still cutting through. And if this was too wide, you'd get like a problem like this. Now check this out. If you did it way too wide, you literally lose like almost everything. If you cranked up the stereo separation way too much after the fact, you're going to lose a lot of that information. So you got to be very careful. And Maurice West talked about this, how he had an obsession with making everything wide, and then he was losing a lot of that power in the song when he made it in mono. And so you just got to back it off. Don't go too crazy. I mean, if you wanted to make this sound wider, you could do it in many ways inside of the synth. Increase that pan amount, maybe add a little bit more reverb, introduce a chorus, an ensemble, a flanger, something like that. Many better ways you can introduce width rather than just cranking up one knob, because it's lazy, and in 2019 you should be doing better methods to create more stereo width, panning, and all those effects. So this kind of shows you that you don't always have to go here and make things completely mono. I mean, there are some situations, like there's a song I'm working on where I did that on the kick. I came to the kick and cranked it all the way up, made it merged. But you don't have to do that. And there are situations where, like with this kick, how we showed, where I didn't want to make it completely mono. Kind of sounds weird when I do that. Let's listen to this again. And then normal. See, it has that nice little width to it. And really, that's kind of like just shows you guys the simplicity of this, is that there's really, we could talk about how, yeah, there's no right or wrong, but the foundation is that your percussion should be generally mono, with the exception of like rides and toms and the cymbals and moving around those toms, panning them back and forth. Your synths have something powerful in the mono, because if I turn off the mono synth and just play this back, now with the mono, there's subtle differences, but the mono gives it more body. And so always remember that if the body is lacking, maybe you don't have enough foundation mono sounds. If it's too stagnant and sounds like it's too much like in the middle, then it sounds like you should start panning some stuff, add an effect vocal here, start panning stuff left and right. And so I want to wrap things up by just showing you guys maybe like an effect. And let's just add something from the Jackson Vega pack. Downlifter. So you see how that's going all over the place. This is not something you'd want in mono. This would ruin it if it was in mono. So let's see. If this was in mono, this would just sound terrible. Check this out. Like, it literally just sounds like a mono white noise now, rather than having that nice little LFO pan. Now again, with this in the mix, I would generally check the EQ. A lot of samples don't have to be EQ'd. But here I would drop it down in the mix. I go all the way down and I would listen. And it's okay there at that volume, wherever it is. It's at like -15. And it just depends on each sample. And with white noise has a really good benefit wide. You can also do it mono. So I'm going to add here a really cool synth called Dune. And in Dune, I've made a video on this on my other channel long back. But you can just make this monophonic, crank up the noise. All right. And you go to the noise panel, oscillator 3/noise, and you have the width. See that? Mono, wide. And you can crank up the high pass. And now we have like just something simple to start with. I would generally EQ this, sometimes even add a little bit of reverb to it, subtle. And if we put this into the mix, let's put this on the same rack as the downlifter. And we're gonna make a pattern, just call it wide noise. And these small things that we do, they do a lot to add to it. You know, like I wouldn't make this an obnoxious white noise, super loud. Hello, I'm white noise. But the thing is, when it's subtle in the mix, it's unconscious. The listener takes it in, but he doesn't really know it's there. And it's all these subtleties. You got to paint it like a picture. Think of a painter. When he has a canvas, he's limited to the amount of paint, the amount of, you know, palettes he can choose. The canvas is limited, and you're also limited too. So use those limitations to inspire you to keep things at a lower level in the mix, work subtractively. So let's do like a 4-bar. And let's just give these a naming here, and I'm gonna let you guys download this. So if you guys want to download this, guys, feel free, be my guest. You just need FL Studio 20, and the download is in the video description. And I always like working with colors. We're very colorful people. We work off of visuals, so I always like to give things a nice color scheme. I like the darker tones, and that's pretty much it. So now let's listen to the white noise. So cool. Now we have different stuff here. Let's solo them to wrap things up. And we can see the kick. Generally mono, tiny little bit of stereo. The toms. Toms, they're not a great sample to fit this project, but they're wide. They're being panned kind of. We listen to the ride. The ride, you know, it's sitting there kind of half and half. It's not super mono, but it's not super wide. Let's listen to the synth. We have a combination of both a mono synth and the wide one as well. That reverb doing a good job at making some more space, and of course the effect. You can absolutely take it a step further by doing more panning, doing LFO pan on the noise. There's just so many different combinations, and it would take me hours to talk about the things that you could do with width. But I hope this video was a bit insightful as to like my approach and the things I would do. And there are many like electro house, and moving forward, if I do like G house, bass house, electro house, whatever, bass lines don't have to always be mono. Like they can have information in the stereo field. So I have this relationship where I don't believe everything one producer says or everything this one producer says. I listen to all the producers, and then I paint my own way. I pave my own path. And that should be what you guys do when you go into your projects, is you take in that knowledge, but you do your own thing. Now, it doesn't mean that take your kick and do this. Do some crazy stuff, make it 100% wide. There are foundations that should be respected for a reason, right? We don't need to be hit by a car to look both ways on the road, you know? There's some stuff that we can learn a lot from others, and they have good reason behind it and good logic behind it. So I hope this video was of some insight to you guys who do some stuff to your stereo separation. Maybe you wanted some information as to what I'm thinking of with stuff like that. If you guys are thinking about other samples like crowd chants, those can be wide, or vocal haze, they can be wide, they can be panned. If you're thinking about snare drums, like snare loops, again, those can be mono, but they can also have wide as well. There can be a wide clap on top of a mono kick. So really, the sky is the limit with this, and I hope this was of some insight to you guys. If you guys enjoyed this video, remember to smash that like button. And I recommend getting this plugin, MSED. It's a pretty cool tool. I haven't used it a lot, but I really like the visuals and how lean and not so cumbersome that it is. Pretty lightweight. And make sure you guys are subscribed. We are heading towards the 1,000 subscribers, so I got to put together a nice juicy sample pack to give my thanks back to you guys. And if you have any requests, guys, feel free to let me know in the comments section below, because your guys' requests is so important and it helps me fuel more content and get better as a producer, to help you guys get better as producers as well. Voice crack. All right, that's a wrap, guys. I'll see you guys in the next video. Take care.